All right, so I'm taking my dog for a walk yesterday morning, just trying to get some exercise before I start my workday, and I've got ESPN radio playing through my headphones, because that's what I always listen to when I'm walking the dog. First, Take comes on, and normally I might be a bit distracted by my dog pulling on the leash or stopping to sniff things, but then I hear Stephen A. Smith start talking about the New York Giants and their coaching staff situation, and I'm like, okay, let me actually focus on this, because the Giants have been all over the news lately with John Harbaugh's hiring and all the changes they're making. So I really tune in to what I'm hearing while my dog is doing his business. And there's Stephen A. at the desk with Mad Dog Russo and Molly Karam broadcasting from somewhere. And you can tell from their energy that they're about to discuss something major about the Giants' off-season plan. Hey, what's up everyone? Before we dive into everything I have for you today, I need to share something real with you that would mean the absolute world to me. That subscribe button right there. Hitting it right now would bring me one step closer to my dream of reaching 1,000 subscribers. I know you're eager to get into all this content, but real quick, just smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell. It's such a simple thing. It takes literally 1 second, but it's honestly the biggest way you can support this journey and help me reach that milestone. Trust me, every single subscription gets me closer to that goal. And honestly, it would mean everything to me. So, do me that quick favor right now and be part of this dream becoming reality. Stephen A. opens the segment by talking about reports that just came out, saying the Giants are interested in hiring Jeff Stoutland as their offensive line coach. He's going on about how Stoutland just left the Philadelphia Eagles after 13 years, where he was widely considered the best O-line coach in the entire league, and if the Giants can land him, it would be a massive coup for their organization. Stephen A. says Stoutland's resume speaks for itself. Under his coaching, the Eagles' offensive line had 26 Pro Bowl selections, 14 All-Pro selections, they won 2 Super Bowls, and just last year they helped Saquon Barkley rush for over 2,000 yards. He talks about how Jason Kelce, who's a future Hall of Famer, credited Stoutland with his entire career, saying there's absolutely no one he credits more for his success than his O-line coach. Mad Dog is nodding along and he says, yeah, Stoutland is legitimately one of the best position coaches in the entire NFL. Regardless of position, if the Giants can get him, that would immediately upgrade their offensive line, which has been terrible for years. Then Stephen A. starts talking about the complications with Stoutland's situation. He explains that according to reports, Stoutland didn't actually retire from the Eagles. He left because Nick Sirianni removed his run game coordinator responsibility, which was essentially a demotion. Stephen A. says, so Stoutland walked away after being pushed out, but the Eagles already hired a new O-line coach, so there's some contractual weirdness about whether Stoutland is actually free to coach for another team or if he's still technically under contract with Philadelphia. He mentions that Jordan Ronan, who covers the Giants, tweeted that Stoutland won't be landing with the Giants this offseason, but then someone from Chat Sports talked to Brian Baldinger at Super Bowl Radio Row, and Baldinger, who's extremely close to Stoutland, said he didn't retire, and he thinks Stoutland is going to coach somewhere. Mad Dog says, so there's conflicting information. Some people think he's not going to the Giants, and others think he might, but nobody really knows what's happening with his contract situation. Molly jumps in at this point and asks what Baldinger actually said. Stephen A. pulls up the quote and reads it. Baldinger said anybody that could land Jeff Stoutland will make their team infinitely better for a long time. He does things that nobody else in this league does. He's simply the best in the business. Whatever the Giants have to do to make him want to coach this team, they should do, just like they went all out to get John Harbaugh. They should do whatever it takes to get Stoutland. Make him an offer he can't refuse. Stephen A. says that's pretty definitive. Baldinger clearly thinks Stoutland is going to coach, and he's basically telling the Giants to back up the Brinks truck and pay whatever it takes to get him. Mad Dog says, but can the Giants even do that if he's still under contract with the Eagles? That's the big question that nobody seems to have an answer to. But then Stephen A. pivots to something that really caught my attention and made me actually stop walking my dog. He says, "But you know what? While everyone is focused on the Giants trying to hire offensive line coaches and coordinators and all that, there's another name that's been floating around in Giants circles that nobody is really talking about yet." And that's when Stephen A. drops a name I absolutely wasn't expecting. He says, according to sources he's been hearing from, one player who could potentially be available and who the Giants should be very interested in is Chris Olave from the New Orleans Saints. When I hear this, I'm like, wait, what? Chris Olave to the Giants? That would be absolutely massive for their offense. Stephen A. starts breaking down why this could make sense, and honestly, the more he talks about it, the more I'm like, yeah, this would be a game-changing move for New York. He says, look, the Giants' receiving core has been decimated by injuries. They lost their top receiver to injury. Malik Neighbors got hurt. Their entire offense has been completely dysfunctional, and they desperately need an elite wide receiver who can be a true number one option. Stephen A. says Chris Olave is exactly that. He's been one of the most productive receivers in the league over the past few years. When he's been healthy, he runs crisp routes, he has great hands, he can stretch the field vertically, and he'd be the perfect target for whoever the Giants' quarterback is going to be, whether it's Jackson Dart or someone else. He talks about how Olave represents everything the Giants need at the receiver position, a proven commodity who can elevate the entire offense. Mad Dog immediately asks how realistic this actually is. Stephen A. says, the Saints are in a weird spot right now. They're way over the salary cap. They need to make moves to get compliant, and Olave is one of their most valuable trade assets. He mentions that New Orleans has been rumored to be shopping some of their players to clear cap space, and if the Giants come calling with the right offer, maybe the Saints would be willing to move Olave. Stephen A. talks about how the Giants have draft capital, including potentially a high first-round pick, and they could package that with maybe a second-rounder and possibly a player to make a deal happen. Mad Dog says, but Olave has had some injury issues over the past couple seasons. He's dealt with concussions and other ailments. So, is he really worth giving up significant assets for when there's no guarantee he stays healthy? The conversation shifts to talking about how Olave would fit with the Giants' offense. Stephen A. gets really detailed about this, talking about how the Giants are in a rebuilding phase, but they're not trying to tank completely. They want to be competitive and develop their young players. He says having a receiver like Chris Olave would immediately make whoever is playing quarterback better, whether it's Jackson Dart, who they're probably going to draft, or Daniel Jones if he somehow stays healthy, or whoever else. Stephen A. talks about how Olave could pair with Malik Neighbors, assuming Neighbors comes back healthy from his injury, and those two together would form one of the best young receiving duos in the entire league. He says imagine having Neighbors working the slot and intermediate routes while Olave stretches the field on the outside. That would give the Giants a legitimate offensive identity for the first time in years. Mad Dog says that sounds great on paper, but the Giants also need to fix their offensive line and their running game and about 15 other things. So is spending a bunch of draft capital on a receiver really the smartest move? Stephen A. fires back and says, but that's exactly why you try to hire Jeff Stoutland. You fix the offensive line through coaching and maybe bringing in some free agents, and then you add elite skill position talent through trades. He talks about how the Giants can do multiple things at once. It doesn't have to be either or. They can improve the O-line and also upgrade at receiver. Mad Dog says that's fair, but you're also assuming the Giants have unlimited resources and assets, when in reality they need to be strategic about how they allocate their draft picks and cap space. They also discuss the Saints' motivation for potentially trading Olave. Stephen A. mentions that New Orleans is in cap hell. There's something like $70 million over the cap for next season, and they have to make painful decisions to get compliant. He says trading Chris Olave would clear a significant amount of cap space and would give them draft picks to rebuild with. So from the Saints' perspective, it might make sense, even though it would be really painful to trade one of your best young players. Mad Dog says, but the Saints also just drafted Olave a few years ago, He's only 24 or 25 years old. So trading him now would be admitting that their roster construction failed. And are they really ready to do that? Molly brings up the injury concerns with Olave. She mentions that he's had multiple concussions over the past couple seasons, and there's always worry with receivers who have concussion history that they might have to retire early or that one more big hit could end their career. Stephen A. says that's definitely a valid concern. The Giants would need to do their due diligence medically before pulling the trigger on any trade, but if the doctors clear him and say he's good to go, then you take that risk because the upside is so high. He talks about how elite receivers don't become available very often, and when they do, you have to be aggressive even if there are some question marks. Mad Dog says, but if you're the Giants and you trade significant assets for Olave, and then he gets another concussion in Week 3 and has to retire, you've basically torpedoed your rebuild, so the risk is enormous. The conversation continues, and they start talking about the Giants' overall offensive vision. Stephen A. gets really passionate about this, talking about how the Giants need an identity on offense. They've been so bland and generic for so long, and adding a dynamic playmaker like Chris Olave would give them something they can build around. He says pair Olave with Neighbors, add in whoever they draft at quarterback, fix the offensive line with Stoutland coaching them up, and suddenly you have a foundation for an actually good offense. Mad Dog says yeah, but you're talking about like 5 or 6 major things, all having to go, right? What if Neighbors doesn't come back the same after his injury? What if Jackson Dart isn't actually good? What if Stoutland doesn't come to the Giants? Then you've traded for Olave, and you still have a terrible offense. Stephen A. also brings up John Harbaugh and how he negotiated an unlimited budget for his coaching staff. He says this is exactly why Harbaugh wanted that in his contract. So when opportunities like Jeff Stoutland become available, he has the resources to go get him. Stephen A. talks about how Harbaugh is building this thing the right way. He's being aggressive in trying to hire the best coaches, and now the front office needs to match that aggression by being willing to trade for elite players like Chris Olave. Mad Dog says that makes sense. You hired Harbaugh to change the culture and build a winner, so you need to give him the tools to actually do that. They also discuss other coaching staff moves the Giants are making. Stephen A. mentions that they're interviewing Marcus Arroyo from Arizona State for the quarterback coach position, and there are discussions about adding Dave Clawson, who was the head coach at Wake Forest, to the offensive staff in some capacity. He says the Giants are clearly doing their homework and trying to build a quality coaching staff top to bottom, which is encouraging because they've been so poorly coached for so long. Mad Dog says, yeah, the Giants have been a dysfunctional organization for over a decade now, so seeing them actually be proactive and aggressive in trying to hire good coaches is refreshing. Molly tries to get them to make predictions about whether the Olave trade will actually happen. Stephen A. says he thinks there's maybe a 25 or 30% chance it happens. It's definitely not likely, but it's not impossible either. He says the Saints need to clear cap space, and the Giants need a #1 receiver, so the fit makes sense. But actually pulling off a trade for a player of Olave's caliber is always complicated. Mad Dog says he thinks it's even less likely, maybe 10 or 15%, because the Saints would be admitting failure by trading Olave, and the Giants probably don't want to give up the assets it would take to get him. The segment starts winding down, and they both kind of summarize their positions. Stephen A. says the Giants need to be aggressive this offseason. They need to hire Jeff Stoutland to fix the offensive line. They need to trade for a player like Chris Olave to upgrade the receiving corps, and they need to draft well to add young talent to the roster. He says if the Giants do all of those things, they could actually be competitive next season instead of being a bottom-feeder team again. Mad Dog says he agrees the Giants need to make big moves, but he's skeptical they'll actually pull the trigger on something as bold as trading for Chris Olave. And he thinks more realistically, they'll make smaller moves and continue to be mediocre. Molly thanks them both, and the show goes to commercial. I'm standing there with my dog, who's now pulling on the leash, trying to continue our walk. And honestly, I'm pretty blown away by the Chris Olave idea. On one hand, I can totally see Stephen A.'s point that Olave would be a game-changer for the Giants' offense. He's a proven elite receiver who's only 24 or 25 years old. He could pair with Malik Neighbors to form an incredible young receiving duo, and he'd make whoever is playing quarterback for the Giants exponentially better. The Giants have been starved for offensive playmakers for years, and adding someone of Olave's caliber would instantly give them credibility on that side of the ball. Plus, if they can also land Jeff Stoutland to fix the offensive line, suddenly you're looking at an offense that has legitimate pieces to build around. But on the other hand, I can also see Mad Dog's point about the risk. Olave has had multiple concussions, which is really concerning for his long-term health. The Saints would probably demand a huge haul in return, which would cost the Giants valuable draft picks they need for their rebuild. And there's no guarantee that even with Olave and a better offensive line, the Giants would actually be good given how many other problems they have across the roster. Whether this actually happens or not remains to be seen, but one thing is clear. The Giants are at a crossroads where they need to make bold moves to get out of the decade-long pit of mediocrity they've been stuck in, and trading for someone like Chris Olave, while also hiring elite coaches like Jeff Stoutland, could be exactly the type of aggressive approach that finally turns things around.